All right, my goal is to make this video pretty short. We've been talking about how to factor, so you know how to factor. You know how to solve for roots, so I just want to show you a few tricky cases to make sure you know once you factor how to name all of the roots. So on this first problem, if we number here questions 1 and questions 2, the first thing I want you to remember is that because we've got a degree of 3, there's going to be 3 roots here. So we want to just make sure that we name all 3 of them. Remember, if a variable is by itself on the outside, that's going to give me a root of 0. So you can either write x equals 0, or you can write 0, 0 if you want to. The second one, remember, if there's a number in the front, it came from the bottom. So this is going to be positive 9/5 because we changed the sign. Or some of you are good at writing the ordered pairs, so 9/5, 0. And then this last one is just the opposite of it's a minus 10, so the factor, or the root itself, is going to be 10. So the root there is going to be 10, 0. All right, question 2, again, this has 3 roots, so we just want to make sure that we name them all. So this first one is going to be negative 13. That's pretty simple. The second one, I just want you to pay attention to the fact that that is squared. So this is going to be negative 1, which is a double root. And you can either write it as a double root, like you can list it twice, or you can name it, you're going to see this kind of later on where they say multiplicity of 2. That just means that the factor or that root is happening twice. So that's just how they note that as multiplicity 2. All right, so let's look at one that's a little more complicated. You all know we've just been labeling that that's positive 1, this is negative 1, and you know that these are going to be quadratic formula. So I just want to go through with you real quick on quadratic formula on both of those, just so you have an example in your notes. So you all know quadratic formula for the first one, that's going to give me a is 1, b is 1, c is 1. All right, so x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we're going to simplify that out. So you may want to pause the video and just see if you're going to get the right thing. All right, that was my next step. And then because I know, I'm just reminding you, because we know that there's a negative on the inside here, that's going to be an imaginary root. So this is going to be negative 1 plus I square root 3 over 2, and also negative 1 minus I square root 3 over 2. All right, then I'm going to go back and do quadratic formula again for this other part. So this is going to be, let's see, a is 1, b this time is negative 1, c is 1. That's going to be x equals negative b, so positive 1 plus or minus the square root, b squared. Negative 1 times negative 1 is just positive 1, minus 4ac all over 2a. This time I'm going to get 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 over 2, which again is going to break down 1 plus I square root 3 over 2 and 1 minus I square root 3 over 2. And the biggest thing I wanted to show you in this problem is just know, because this says exponent 6, the degree is 6, you should have 6 answers. So I've got 1, negative 1, this answer, this answer, this answer. So notice that altogether that's giving me 6 answers. So you want to make sure that you know that so that you list all answers when a question asks you that moving forward. All right, this last part is the trick that I really want to show you about, so we'll call these examples 3 and 4. So you know when you're factoring, we've been talking about this week, you know that when you break this down, that when you get to this point, you cannot break either of these down anymore because these are not difference of squares. And the reason is, one, on this first one, this is addition, right? You can't break apart addition. And on the next one, you can't break apart 8, right? That's subtraction, which would work if we had a better number here, but 8's not a perfect square, so you can't break it apart. So what I want to talk about is a shorter way to find the roots other than doing quadratic formula. And to me, it's just to take square roots. So technically, I mean, we've talked, I don't know if I've actually said this to you very well this semester, but x squared plus 5, when we're finding roots, we're really setting all of our factors equal to 0. All right, so for example, if I give you just kind of an example problem to show you that that's actually what we've been doing, think about if the factor was x minus 8, we say the answer is positive 8. That's because if you say x minus 8 equals 0, you add 8 to both sides and you get positive 8. When we say 2x plus 5, we say that the root then is going to be -5 over 2. That's because when you set this equal to 0, you subtract 5 from both sides, 2x equals -5, and then you divide by 2, which is what's giving us these root answers. It's just that we've been doing all of that in our head. So now if we go back and apply that concept to this other problem, we're going to set each of those equal to 0, and eventually you're going to find a shortcut, but we'll just write it out this time. All right, we've got x squared plus 5 equals 0. That means x squared equals -5. So first of all, we're going to take the square root. And you need to know when you take square roots, you get 2 answers. Think about the quadratic formula. Remember how it says plus or minus? Well, that's because you're taking a square root. So this is going to give me x equals, because the square root and the square root cancel each other out, plus or minus the square root of -5. And then because you're taking the square root of a negative, that's going to be I. So the 2 answers that this gives me are x equals positive I square root 5 and x equals -I square root 5. All right. The same thing can be done with this x squared minus 8. X squared minus 8 equals 0. X squared equals positive 8. And then we can just take the square root on both sides. X equals plus or minus, because remember we need to get 2 answers. And you'll know that, right? Because this says x squared. You know that means you're going to have 2 answers in there. X squared equals the square root of 8, which you can break down. That's 4 and 2, right? Square root of 4, square root of 2. So that's going to give me x equals positive 2 square root 2 and x equals -2 square root 2. So now let's go back and check our original problem. This says x to the 5th, so I should have 5 answers. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and my 5th answer is from this x out here in the front. Remember, that's going to give me just 0 as a root. All right, so if you want to try this other problem on your own, question 4 you can. Actually, I'll just go ahead and do that one for you. I don't know why I said that. So if I try question 4 here, I know I should have 3 answers. So I'm going to name the ones that I see easily. This is going to be positive 7. All right, this other one I'm going to go ahead and solve out. So 4x squared plus 3 equals 0. That's 4x squared equals -3. You do have to divide by 4 before you can take the square root. So x squared equals -3/4. And then we'll take the square root. So x is going to equal plus or minus the square root of -3/4. Now, we haven't talked too much about this, but I feel like you're going to follow this pretty easily. If you break that down, the square root of 4 you can break down. That's just 2. And you can take the -1 out there. So I've got an I, and I have the square root of 4, which is going to equal 2. So the final answer here, or the 2 roots that this is going to give me, is going to be x equals positive I square root 3 divided by 2, and x equals -I square root 3 divided by 2. All right, so let's zoom out again, see if we can find our answers here. I wanted 3 answers, so I've got the 7, this positive version, and the negative version. Those are my 3 answers there. All right, in this last question, I'm not going to work out quadratic formula with that last part because I think that you all can do that. You just probably need practice at it. So this last part is quadratic formula. I just wanted to point out to you that this first one for you, remember that that's still 0, and that this middle factor right here is kind of written backwards from what you all are used to seeing. That factor also can be written as 5u minus 6, like if you want to put the u part first or the variable part first, which is then going to give you a root of positive 6 over 5. All right, so those are your 2 roots, and then you'll get 2 more out of quadratic formula here.